Now we are switching gears to addressing unemployment in Africa. As I mentioned during the beginning of this interview, we are putting a lot of emphasis on the young people, and what is happening in the Kenyan economy is that the Kenyan economy is growing. Inflation has eased. The sectors like ICT, agriculture, manufacturing, and also financial services continue to expand. Yet, for millions of Kenyans, well, remains the biggest questions. Where are these jobs? Every year, hundreds of thousands of graduates enter into the labor market and struggle for a secure, a decent employment. And that is the discussion that we will be talking, we'll be putting on emphasis on. And allow me to introduce my second hour panelist, where we are addressing unemployment in Africa. As you can see on your screen via Zoom, all the way from South Africa, we have Ivor Ichikovitz. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, and good morning to all of your viewers in Kenya. It's great to be teleporting into one of my favorite countries.
Welcome. It's an honor to be talking to you. Ivor Ichikovitz is the founder Africa Youth Survey, and we also do expect Bami Malaika. But before we open up this conversation, the African Youth Survey consistently show unemployment among young people as the biggest concern. Has anything changed over the last 1 year?
So it's really interesting. We've been tracking optimism amongst the African youth for nearly 6 years now. And we are seeing the levels of optimism in Africa at the highest level ever. Yet we're seeing the African youth telling us that they are the most dissatisfied with the performance of their government ever. So how does this work? What does one read into this? And the answer is very simple. The African youth today believe that the future of the continent depends on the ability of their governments to create an enabling environment that is going to allow for high-paying jobs, that is going to allow for economic rebalancing so that we can deal with the poverty issue for once and for all. And this is a generation that is saying that they are optimistic because they know they have a voice. They're optimistic because they know that they have the ability to use that voice. And they're optimistic because they know they're going to use that voice to make sure that high-paying jobs, employment, economic sustainability become an absolute reality in their world today. I think we're at a very important inflection point in the history of the African continent. And that inflection point is actually being played out in Kenya right now as we speak, because everything that the youth survey is telling us is being confirmed by what you're seeing in the streets in Kenya. So job creation is no longer just about jobs. Job creation today is about everything. It's about how we reorder the African economic system. It's how we reorder what democracy means in Africa. It's how we reorder the way that we engage with our foreign partners and the rest of the world. Job creation's right at the center of it, because that's where the rubber hits the road. So I have to tell you, the African youth are telling us that prosperity is no longer optional. They are going to be prosperous, with or without their governments. And that the key to that prosperity is an enabling environment for entrepreneurship and governments supporting strategy to ensure high-paying jobs that are going to allow the African youth to stand toe-to-toe with youth everywhere else in the world.
Yeah, and Ivor, I'm looking at Africa and the GDPs, looking at Kenya, South Africa. All these economies are growing. We are recording good numbers. But why are they not translating into enough jobs for our youth?
So you've just mentioned, ironically, the exact outliers in the survey. You know, the least satisfaction that we're picking up is in countries where we're seeing massive GDP growth. The worst performing countries, or let's put it differently, South Africa and Kenya sit in the worst performing countries in Africa. Yet there is GDP growth in both of those countries. But that tells you that we're looking at the wrong numbers. GDP growth doesn't equal job creation. GDP growth doesn't equal people on the ground experiencing a difference in their daily reality. And that's what we need to be focusing on. Nothing supports a change of circumstance better than availability of jobs in an environment where people want to work. And I think that that's a key issue. You know, we're coming out of a post-colonial environment where Africans were convinced by the colonial powers that they were in some way dependent and needed to be looked after. The generation that is coming into the job market today, the generation that is coming into leadership today, doesn't believe that they need to be dependent. In fact, they don't want to be dependent. And the consequence of that is you now have a generation that actually wants to work. So instead of designing economies and countries with high GDP growth, where that GDP growth sits in the hands of a very small minority of people, we need to create economies where the GDP growth is created very broadly and where everybody has an opportunity to participate in the economy and work to achieve their potential rather than sitting waiting for handouts.
And you've mentioned Kenya and South Africa. From where you sit, which African country is doing the best, and what lessons can a country like Kenya or South Africa borrow from that country?
I hate to tell you, except for Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa, the rest of the continent is doing really exceptionally. And part of the reason that the rest of the continent is doing really exceptionally is because the rest of the continent is not waiting for corporations and governments to create jobs for them. They're going out and creating informal sector opportunities for themselves. They're building their own jobs. They're creating opportunities for themselves because they've completely lost faith in their government's abilities to play any role in helping them create economic opportunity. So what we're seeing in places like Nigeria, South Africa, and Kenya is there still remains an expectation amongst the youth that governments are able to create jobs. I think the time has come for Africans to realize that government's role is to create an enabling environment, to create policies, to create legislation that allows the private sector and allows young Africans to create jobs, but not, and then to step out of the way. Government needs to create the enabling environment and leave it then to the private sector to go to the next stage. And that way you will find that large corporations will come and make investments which will create jobs, and investors will come in and support young entrepreneurs, and economies will thrive. So I think that the reason that Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria are kind of at the back of the queue is because this expectation of government that is unachievable still exists. So really interesting, countries like Rwanda, Ethiopia, Ghana, this is where you will see the highest level of youth satisfaction. And one of the characteristics that cuts across all three of those countries is that government is performing this enabling role and then stepping out of the way. So there are some lessons that we can learn from other countries in Africa that should educate how countries like Kenya should be behaving.
Thank you, Ivor. I'll be getting back to you, but allow me to also introduce my second panelist, Bami Malaika. Bami Malaika is a job market analyst. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Ren. Thank you for having me.
Now, I was just looking at some of the statistics. High rate of unemployment, Kenya standards. For the young people, 17.5%, that's just about 15 to 34. Others are, according to the Kenya Labor Market Information, 35.9 are underemployed or in low-paying jobs. How can we bring these numbers down, or it's not as grim as these numbers suggest?
So to start with, I would echo what Ivor has mentioned. How do we bring the numbers down? I think you bring the numbers down by, as he said, creating an environment where youth can thrive. And how does that happen? You create an environment where investors can come in and set up places where youth can work. You set up an environment where they can be entrepreneurs. I think Kenya has a very entrepreneurial spirit among the youth. So I think you win in creating these circumstances by creating an environment in which a young person with lots of potential can wake up one day and be like, okay, I'd like to start this business. The environment around me supports that. I have the resources to be able to do that. I have the, monetary support to be able to do that, for my business to thrive. And I think when you have, like he said, investors coming in and setting up things where people can work, I think you also address the issue of, being underemployed as well, because you expand the market. And so you have more people being placed in places where, they've studied for a particular thing, they're educated in a particular thing, and there's a market where they can go and work for that particular thing.
So which sector are actually hiring? Because we are seeing some sectors shedding jobs because of automation and more specifically AI.
So I wouldn't be able to speak on what sector exactly is hiring at the moment. But I think as the world continues to evolve, as you said, even with the automation, I think even with the technological advances, yes, there's some things that are being phased out, but there are also new things that are coming up. And so I think the key will be integration. So even in the traditional spaces that we know, there's of course a tech element to it that's evolving at the moment. So I think how things will evolve is that, okay, fine, yes, maybe you're in the medical sector, but new things will come up and that'll expand, the capacity of the sector to hold more youth. So I think I would roughly say that. Yes.
And is Kenya producing graduates for jobs that no longer exist? I'm saying this because when I completed high school, the in thing was accounting, computer. But we have seen what has happened in the accounting field. So many programs that we don't need 10 accountants. You can have 2 or even 1 accountant. Are we having graduates who are having courses that the market is not quite interested in?
Are we having graduates who the market is not quite interested in? I wouldn't say so. I'd go back to the point again that the survey is echoing, that the markets are there, they're just not big enough. And so the responsibility is to broaden them. It is not wrong for people to be going to study certain things because that is their point of interest. Maybe that is what they've felt called to do. But I do think that knowing that there should be an effort to expand those markets. Yes.
Ivor, if you can hear me, which jobs are the most, from where you sit, which are the jobs that are most vulnerable to automation over the next 5 years?
Ironically, I think automation for Africa is actually a huge opportunity. It's not a problem. There's no question that the nature of the job market is going to change. There's no question that different kinds of skills are going to need to be developed. And even people that are currently in the job market are going to need to evolve with the reality of technology. Technology is a tool. It is not it's not a risk to job creation. It just allows people to work quicker and work smarter and work in a far more connected way. Africa is going to represent the single biggest workforce in the world. As we're sitting here in Africa battling with the creation of jobs, you have a scenario in places like China. Can you imagine 2 billion people and they don't have enough labor? So, Africa has the potential to be providing the intellect and the human capital to the rest of the world through connectedness and automation. A job in 2036 is going to be very different to a job in 2026. Today, you get a job, you get a desk, you go to work, you get on a train or you get on a bus or you get on a bicycle and you go to work. That's not what the job market's going to look like, probably not even in 5 years' time. So I think that the kind of skills that need to be trained today are thinking skills. One of your earlier guests spoke about prompting skills. What are prompting skills? Prompting skills are thinking skills. The role for the new generation of knowledge workers is going to be using machines, using connectedness to work globally. The fact that they happen to sit in Kenya or sit in Ghana or sit in Rwanda or sit in South Africa is completely academic. And the way to stop the massive problem of migration around the world is for corporations and for investors to invest in creating an enabling environment to train people in Africa to be able to work remotely around the world. So I don't think there's a threat from automation and technology. I think it's going to be the mega enabler for Africa to enter the global job market.
And most employers argue that some of these graduates lack experience, hands-on experience. But where exactly are they supposed to get this experience if they're not given a chance? So do you believe this is a fair criticism for those entering the job market?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's a very fair criticism. One of the challenges we have in Africa is that it is very, very difficult for a young graduate to get any job experience. And that's why I think we have to think completely differently around how we bring young people into the job market. You know, heaven forbid we should talk about things like national service. You know, national service all over the developed world has been a massive contributor to giving young people the opportunity to enter the workspace, get opportunities that then make a contribution, allow them to make a contribution to their countries, their economies. In the same way that young Africans are talking about a new way of looking at democracy in Africa, I think we need to look at a new way of bringing young Africans into the job market. National service might be one way, and don't think national service as in military service, national service as in get involved in activities that are going to make a contribution to the development of our countries, whether that is in the public sector or the private sector or in the community sector or in the education sector. And that way young Africans will get an opportunity to make a difference by contributing to their countries and make a difference by getting job experience, which then allows them to find out what they want to do. One of the other terrible things we impose on our youth is we expect them at the age of 16 or 17 or 15 even to know what they want to do for the rest of their lives. How can you do that to a young person? You need to give them an opportunity to go and experience the world and see where their niche is and see what they love to do. You know, some people love to be with other people, and are geared for jobs that are human facing. Other people love to be engaging with computers. That gears them for jobs that are computer facing. But how do they know until they've had that experience? And part of the problem we have on the continent today is that we're churning out people with the wrong skills. We're churning out people because who go into specific environments because they think that's going to be the easiest way for them to get a job. Sometimes in countries, we need pastry chefs and we don't need accountants. So, you know, go train pastry chefs, but go and train the right people to be pastry chefs. And I think we've got to completely rethink the way we do things on this continent. We've got to stop taking systems from the West that don't work and trying to apply them as being the right way to be doing things in an environment that has completely different circumstances.
Bami, I'm picking from where Ivo has left. Kenya produces thousands of graduates, both from universities and technical TVETs as well. Are universities preparing them for today's job market and the economy as well?
Are universities preparing them? I would say that there's more that can be done to prepare them.
Earlier on, you just finished school, there's a job waiting, but now...
Yes, things are very different. Things are very different. Like he said, in 2036, the market is going to be completely different. So I think one of the biggest issues that we have is that you have universities that are still working with very old systems of how things were done and how things have always been done. And they're not adapting fast enough to how the world is changing, whether this is technologically, whether this is in terms of the job market, whether this is in terms of what career can you actually have by studying this. So I think there is a responsibility for more educational institutions to take on to actually look at how the world is changing and evolve the courses that they're teaching, to evolve the skills that they're teaching their students as well, and to just generally be able to prime them to go into a market that is changing very, very fast. In the past 10 years, possibly what you were learning, it'll likely be the same. So maybe let's say I started in this year. For the next 5 years, there's probably not going to be a lot of change. But in the age of artificial intelligence, in the age of rapid technological advancement, then there is a call for your education to also keep up with it, you know?
Yeah.
So because next week there might be a whole new thing that you've never heard of before, you know? And then what do you do? And so I think even for students who have finished, who are now young professionals, I think you cannot purely rely on what you learned in university. I think you have to take up the responsibility to find out, okay, how is my area changing? What can I do to keep up? So of course it starts with the universities. You need to adapt your courses, you need to adapt your thinking, you need to teach people how to think in a world that is rapidly evolving and give them the skills to be able to adapt. Because I think quite often we're taught how to follow the rules. You do this and you do that, and this is the outcome. But in an age like today, you need to be fast, you need to be flexible, you know? Okay, and I feel like sometimes you need to teach that. So that's on one hand, and then after, also for the students, you need to teach, be active, proactive about your learning and how to evolve and get better to fit a very quickly evolving job market.
And still on the same, because when many young people, you know, they're everywhere, you know, applications here and there. Yeah. Then they decide to branch to entrepreneurship, you know, a small business. But access to credit is becoming quite a big challenge for young people. How do they go about this? Because you'll find them tarmacking, we call it tarmacking here. Yeah. You'll find them tarmacking, and then you'll find somebody decides to just open a small business. But when it comes to access to credit, it becomes a big challenge.
Okay, so if I'm to just take you back, so your question is what can we do so that they can access more credit?
Yeah.
I think that begins with policy. So, and that begins, of course, with listening. So I think if you have more youth inclusive policies around, you know, things to do with credit and things to do with the job market as well, if you're actually listening to the youth, then you're able to take up what they're saying and translate it into things that can actually cause reform. And so I think it puts a mirror to us. And so you have to look in that mirror and say, okay, you have a very resilient youth. So even in the horrible situation of you're not able to find a job, even with all your education and all that you've been able to do, you cannot find a job. But they don't just sit down and give up. They say, okay, I can't get a job. I'm going to open something. I'm going to start my small business, and it'll continue to grow. So I think we need to be able to, the institutions, the government needs to be able to look at that and see that this is a young group of people that have a deep care about their future and a deep will to grow. As he said, they don't want to be dependent anymore. Yeah. If I cannot find a job, I will create something myself. All I am asking for you is to give me the environment to do so. And so I think that is a responsibility. Yes.
Ivor, still on the same question, access to credit for those deciding, for the young men and women who are deciding to venture into entrepreneurship is still a big challenge here in Kenya. I don't know how it is in South Africa, and how can we, you know, circumvent this big challenge?
It's a massive problem throughout the continent. And I think what's amazing and what the youth survey data is telling us is that young Africans are, many of them are not even trying to go into the formal sector job market anymore. A huge percentage of the people we talk to tell us they've already got a business idea, they've already got a business planned, and they're already set their minds on creating a business of their own rather than looking for a job in the formal sector. So availability of credit is a fundamental strategic enabler which governments have to be able to put in place. Now, I'm not suggesting governments need to provide the credit, but they need to create an enabling environment so that the banking sector, the private sector, can provide the credit. Now, please understand there's a huge difference between providing credit and providing aid or gifts. No, none of these young Africans are asking anybody for handouts. As I've said earlier, they're not expecting to get their credit for free. They're not expecting for there to be no risk premium. What they're asking for is a quick, easy, bureaucracy-free way of being able to pitch an idea, put a business plan together. Many of them can do that themselves today, thanks to AI and thanks to automation, and then to be able to get a quick decision. So an enabling environment with the right legislation that allows the private sector to be able to make money out of giving credit, nobody wants gifts, is what is required in every single country on the continent. And that, to a large extent, is going to fill the gap that it is going to be created as the formal sector starts gearing up to create jobs. it's going to take ages for the formal sector, even with government support, to create the jobs we need. One of the things that the African youth are telling us is that they're no longer patient. This is an impatient generation. For them, 2 years is a long time. I mean, what the youth are telling us in 2026 is completely different to what they were telling us in 2024. And part of the problem that we have on this continent is that governments are notoriously slow. This generation of African youth is incredibly fast. So there's a mismatch. And this mismatch is going to be made up by the entrepreneurial sector. So the thing that governments can do the quickest is to create an enabling environment, perhaps with a credit guarantee underpinned by government, for the private sector to make fast microcredit available. The kind of credit we're looking for here is minuscule in the scheme of things. The structures that government and central banks need to put in place to enable private sector credit providers is simple. It's been done all over the world. There's nothing new here. It just requires a will to do this and to engage. And I think that that's the starting point. Don't look at the fact that that young Africans want to be entrepreneurs as a negative. It's a huge positive. The most developed economies in the world stand on the foundation of entrepreneurs, not on formal sector jobs.
And let's look at agriculture. It's the backbone of many African countries. But when you look at the young people, many are not venturing into these territories. Why is that? I don't know about South Africa, but here in the country, many young people are not in agriculture.
Unfortunately, agriculture has been badly marketed. You know, there was a time when the colonial reality that we lived under in places like Kenya, and Kenya is a great example, agriculture was indentured labor. It was slave labor. It was very unacceptable from a political perspective. And that's why a lot of people moved off the land into the cities. We have to start a mass campaign to get young Africans back onto the land. Our greatest asset after our human capital, and our stress after our human capital, is our land. Africa is the breadbasket of the world, because as the developed countries in the world are developing their land and consuming it, our land becomes an essential food security asset for the whole world. So we have to get young Africans to understand that it is not a handicap to be a farmer. It is a massive commercial and economic opportunity, and getting back onto the land is absolutely essential. Making land available, making the resources available to work the land, finding technology solutions to get product to the levels of quality that are required for the international market, creating a processing industry in every African country so that African agricultural commodities can be turned into consumer product. This is going to be a mega, fast, very efficient way of creating jobs and creating economic prosperity. We just have to put a different marketing spin on it.
Allow me to also point out agriculture being the breadbasket for the world, Africa being the breadbasket for the rest of the world. And just like Ivor has noticed or has pointed out this is also a resource that we have that many people are not utilizing it. I will tell you for a fact that I became an active farmer way after college and everything, just to supplement my income. Young people are not venturing into this. They just want the white-collar jobs. Mm-hmm. How can we change this? Because this would actually bridge the gap, the job gap that we have in Africa.
I think I would first pose the question, are we incentivizing them to go into agriculture? Because it's one thing to say, oh, the youth are not doing it, but what incentive are you giving them? And
badly marketed as just like Ivor has.
Terribly marketed.
Yeah.
I think if you walk up to a young person and tell them, actually, you can go farm maize and you can make something out of that, they'll look at you crazy.
Yeah.
And I think the first thing you look at is, what are the returns they would be getting from that? And how long, like we said, it's an impatient generation. So how long will it take before they're able to actually earn something from that agriculture? So it's badly marketed, and I think the environment around it hasn't been optimized enough that you can gain as much as you should from doing that agriculture. And so that becomes deterrent. So it becomes something you can only do once you're established. So maybe once you're much older and you have the capital to go get the land, to, you know, begin to farm, to be able to take the losses, because that's one thing I've also heard, that if you go into farming, you can tell me if it's true.
Yeah.
If you go into farming, you have to be prepared to take a few losses.
Yes.
And so are you asking a young person, you know, that these tomatoes that you've put up, you would need to be able to take that loss maybe year 1, year 2. Do they have the cushion for that? They don't. So for a young person, it would be a stretch. Sorry.
Okay. Something, Ivor, you wanted to add on that?
Sorry, I was saying, and that is the one key area where, with very minimum drain on the fiscus, governments can create a buffer for. It's not difficult to put in place the insurance products that allow private sector to provide capital to emerging farmers. And many economies around the world have been built on exactly that principle. And that's where I say governments have a role to play and shouldn't shirk their responsibility and only leave that in the hands of the entrepreneurs.
And what role should also the private investors put in this? Because we are always talking about the government should, the government should, the government should. What role does the private sector, you included?
What role should the private sector do? I think for a start, just fair payment for the things that are being offered. If you have someone who's bringing you avocados or whatever it is that they're doing, or whether it's even floriculture, flowers, are you paying them a decent amount for the work that they've put in and for the amounts that they've given you? You know, so as much as, yes, private sector, you're interested in making a profit, are you also being fair about what you're paying to these people? I think when you have rates that are actually enticing, then you have more people who would be willing to go into it, and then it starts a cycle, you know? So I think it would start there. How much are you paying for this? What incentives are you giving them to grow and all of that? So I would say that's private sector's role for that.
Ivor, as we wrap up, as the founder of African Youth Savvy, what exactly are some of the bottlenecks that you have noticed, and what are some of the remedies to these bottlenecks?
So I think we've covered a lot of them in this discussion, and I think that it's very good to first of all look at where we've come from. There will always be bottlenecks in terms of creating an enabling environment where none has existed in the past. First of all, the African youth are a power to be harnessed by the private sector, by government, by the international community. And we've got to stop treating our youth as a problem that has to be managed. The energy that both the private sector and governments are putting into managing the risk of the African youth, if that effort was put into creating an enabling environment for the African youth, simple things that can be done with very, very little money, but with serious commitment, I think you will find that many of the bottlenecks will go away. We have a youth on this continent today that are entrepreneurial, that are not scared to work, that are prepared to gain education even if the formal sector education system fails them, and that are frankly also prepared to migrate if their governments and their communities don't create an enabling environment. So take the bottlenecks away. Create the enabling environment. Incentivize the public sector to change their strategy towards how they manage the youth. Stop talking about the youth, start engaging with the youth. And you'll find that the youth themselves will remove a lot of the bottlenecks that exist today. Sure, finance is an issue. Sure, access to opportunity is an issue. Sure, access to formal sector jobs is an issue. Sure, technology is a risk if it's not properly applied. But all of these things can be solved with the right strategy and the right long-term thinking. I don't think any bottlenecks that exist today can't be removed very, very quickly. Actually, every country in Africa is think differently. Forget about the way we did things 2 years ago and 5 years ago. Go to the educational institutions and say, throw away the colonial way of educating people. Let's find a 2026 way of educating people. And unfortunately, these are uncomfortable bottlenecks. These are uncomfortable truths because it's going to mess with people's comfort zone. And the only way we're going to change this continent is to get out of our comfort zones and to create a completely new environment.
All right. Thank you, Ivor. Bami, I know we cannot compare Kenya with developed countries, for example, America, but there are some lessons that we can be able to pick up so that we may be able to not only have educated youth, but we also need youths who are also in the job market as well. As we wrap up.
So you're asking what lessons we can take from these developed countries.
Yes.
I think I would start with things that will shake us out of our comfort zone. And I'd argue that it's some things to do with culture, actually. I think oftentimes in our cultures here, you teach people to be quiet and to follow the rules and not to question, which is quite different, I think, in a lot of these developed countries. So I think if you start creating a culture where you teach youth, yes, you do have a voice, you should speak up. You can go out and do that. You can question this. Of course, get a lot of people out of their comfort zone, but I think that is a beginning point. You know, emboldening youth to actually speak, because we're seeing that they are speaking. So if you encourage that more and empower them more, then I think that starts a chain reaction. So you have this person who was taught in school that I am allowed to ask questions. I do have a vision. My vision means something, and so I'm going to act on it. And then after that, you create the environment for them to do that in. Because I think what the developed countries are very good at doing is, as you said, you create the environment for them to grow their businesses, to develop the ideas, to just, get things going. And so I think that's how we should approach it. Those are the lessons we should take.
Thank you. That has been Bami Malaika, who is a job market analyst. And of course, from South Africa, we had Ivor Ichikovitz, who is the founder African Youth Survey, where we've been looking at youth unemployment in Africa, and more specifically in Kenya, and also South Africa. We've heard from Ivor. That has been a very good discussion. Let's continue this conversation on our social media. Many thanks indeed for joining us. I'm Ben Troy Njue. Lensa Odingo is on the bottom right of your screen, handling the sign language interpretation. Giving the baton to the Swahili desk for Kurunzi Mashinani and Tamrini. Do have yourself a blessed afternoon ahead.